Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining the session today. It's great to see so many people are keen to be part of the conversation around building and strengthening social enterprise networks. My name is Kate, and I'm with Social Enterprise Australia. And these open learning sessions are part of the Social Enterprise Development Initiative that's been funded federally by the DSS. And we're really excited. It helps us create space for change makers and supporters to come together and share ideas and collaborate and build connections. So welcome all. We have a wonderful convener today, Meg Allen from ACRE. Thank you, Meg, and we're going to be delighted to hear also from Ishani, Florence, Belinda, Fiona, and Meg's going to take over shortly to introduce them all. But I would like to stop and recognise the traditional custodians of the unceded land that we're on. I'm joining today from beautiful Wangal country, and I would like to recognise the traditional owners, elders past, present and emerging, and pay my respects and recognise the continuing lines to skies, water and country. And I also welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander participants in the session today. Your presence holds, in fact, 65,000 years of systems thinking and caring for people and planet. And it's so exciting in this purpose-led sector that we can help carry the responsibility and contribute towards social equity and justice. Just to let you know also, the session today is being recorded and we'll share the slides and recording afterwards. And feel free to get busy in the chat box and use your emojis as you want to make comments or add questions. And Pete in the back end, thank you for managing the chat for us today. So I pass over to Meg. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kate, for the welcome and the acknowledgement. My name is Meg Allen. I'm the Market Development Advocacy Lead at ACRE, the Australian Centre for Rural Entrepreneurship. I'm based on Bidawal, Monaro and Yuin countries. That's far east Gippsland in a little town called Malakuta. So we're all here today because we have a shared belief that strong ecosystems enable social enterprise to thrive. And that is especially true in rural contexts. So at ACRE, we're really proud of the role we play as a field builder, contributing to the development of key initiatives both nationally and globally. And so these have included things such as the establishment of CENVIC and the local leads model, the establishment of Social Enterprise Australia. So we thank them in particular for today's opportunity to be chatting with you. We also continue to work really closely with the Social Enterprise World Forum, co-convening a global rural social enterprise network and bringing to life the recommendations of the Rural Social Enterprise Manifesto, which is a key policy document which actually emerged from CENVIC's local lead model and has gone on to have input from over 37 countries and over 100 place-based anchor organisations. Another of our initiatives on the boil at the moment is calling for the co-design of a rural social enterprise network for Australia with our partners at CENVIC. So we see all of these initiatives as really essential to the fabric of the social enterprise sector. In particular, rural communities face common barriers, but they also hold distinct strengths and needs that can be misunderstood by our urban counterparts. So the services, the population density, the distance, and the economies of rural areas are just fundamentally different to our friends in the cities. And this creates different challenges to sustainability, scaling, and impact for rural social enterprises, but also means a different approach to creating networks and bringing social enterprises together. So we sit within state and national ecosystems, but also within a unique domain of our own. So that's why we're here today, to understand more about building and strengthening networks in the rural context and what it actually looks like in practice. So to do that, we're really lucky to be joined by 4 brilliant contributors to this work, and they'll each bring a different perspective from a different lens in the ecosystem. So we have Ishani Chattopadhyay, who's the CEO of CENVIC, Victoria's social enterprise peak body, Florence Davidson, a rural social entrepreneur and CEO of the Christie Foundation, Belinda Morrissey, CEO of the English Family Foundation, a catalytic funder of networks, and Fiona Smith, principal at Make Studios, a leading co-design firm. So I'm going to start and go to Ishani first and get straight into the conversation. So Senvic utilises the local lead model to connect with rural and regional social enterprises and entrepreneurs. So I'd love if you can tell us a little bit more about this local leads model and what it means for Senvic as the state peak body.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Meg. Firstly, you did a wonderful job with my last name, which I know is super complicated and not easy to read, so thanks for that. So I am the CEO of Senvic. We are the peak body for Social Enterprise Network in Victoria. We were probably pioneers, along with ACRE, to bring this local lead model in Victoria. And what that meant was Victoria was divided into 5 or 6 regional areas, and it allowed for regional representation of social enterprise founders and related networks through those local lead networks, which then fed up to us as Senvic. So we've always sort of been network of networks. We cannot be everywhere all at the same time, but it's important for us to listen, hear, learn from, curate and facilitate for all participating members across the state. And the local lead model, I think, was absolutely beneficial to doing that work. Like you said, the challenges and opportunities in regional and rural areas are very distinct. We absolutely do not want to make assumptions that we understand that all from an urban Melbourne lens, which is why we led to work with the Victorian government to set up those local lead networks. It allowed us to get very nuanced feedback, I think, and further strengthened our hypothesis that we are making assumptions that need to be validated at a very local level, and in between regions even, whether it's Geelong or Gippsland, it looks significantly different. Some common challenges, but lots of different challenges. So if you're going to seek to proceed and become a Victoria-focused body helping social enterprise thrive in all of Victoria, it is very important to have the local lead representation model. And the Victorian Social Enterprise Strategy funding allowed us to do that. I want to also say, because I'm very cognizant that there may be members from those networks present today, that funding came to an end when I came into this role about 15 months ago. And for us, it's a continuous battle to really continue to remain relevant for rural and regional social enterprise. And that's why we're very happy to partner with ACRE to take this conversation forward and see what this might look like in the future.
Thanks, Stefani. So you spoke there about the different contexts in each region and being able to understand them when you're city-based. Can you tell us a little bit about how having the local leads model has enabled that two-way learning between urban and region and those connections to form?
Yeah, absolutely. So we essentially had local leads in each of those regional areas. And so we facilitated a bunch of networking, capability building, activities really led by the regional leaders. So this is not us saying, oh, you might need something around this topic. It's really listening, actively listening to the feedback and the gaps that existed within that particular region, and then being able to support that through funding. So I remember attending an event in Ballarat, for example, where we were really focused on understanding verification and certification and the difference and why that might help a social enterprise. And we did some peer-to-peer learning models from established enterprise and smaller enterprises. I've been in part of other discussions where I think groups of social enterprises from regional Victoria came to Purpose Precinct and had this two-way learning process of what does it look like to have a physical presence, and how might we showcase regional products in a place like the Purpose Precinct, which is at Queen Victoria Market and very central, has a lot of footfall, but also recognizing that it's not just a copy-paste model. What does it need for a supply chain that exists rurally or regionally to exist in a market that is so city-centric, for example? So those are the kind of learnings and very kind of deep, nuanced things that we got out of having these regional local leads in place. And I can tell you, when I received that sort of as part of the handover when I took the role on, I spent some time reading through it. Each region was so distinct. There was certain things that were common, as I said, but Gippsland looked very, very different. For example, from Geelong, looked very different from Hume, looked very different from Mildura. And it's such an opportunity for us to lean in and see what we can leverage and build together.
Was that diversity between the regions something you were expecting when you moved into the role, or is it something that the local leads really helped uncover?
A bit of both. So I think from my personal background, because I've worked a lot in inclusive entrepreneurship and spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia, like I knew that hypothesis that assumptions are very easy to make. We always just assume we know how things work as an entrepreneur, or having done investment or built companies. And that was something that I was trained to do, is to put those assumptions on the side and sort of start again by asking open-ended questions. So I think it was kind of a bit of both. I knew that it would not be as kind of easy for me to just get my head around, not having lived in regional Victoria, to understand regional Victoria. But from a higher level, I was aware that I needed to listen, and I needed to actually really dig deep into the data, the insights, the feedback, the qualitative, the quantitative, to get a sense of what's actually happening regionally.
Beautiful. Thanks, Ashani. And I guess I would like to take this opportunity a little cheekily to say, do you have any advice for your fellow urban counterparts on how they can engage with rural members of their network or rural social enterprises in general?
I mean, yeah, I don't like to give advice. I definitely would like to share experiences, but I think it's a missed opportunity, right? Because the thing around entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, is that we all trying to drive towards a bigger cause, more equity, more social inclusion, better job opportunities. So I think there's this tremendous shared vision, but in order to operationalize that, there are certain systems that need to exist so that everyone is moving forward. And that system is not a replicative system. It's not replicating. It's actually understanding the need of that specific area, bringing some leverage from things that you can borrow from, but also being able to tweak and pivot to the context or the operating context of that particular rural or region. So my I guess advice, if any, is to actually just have conversations. Like, literally just dig deep and put all your critical assumptions to the side.
And that's reflected really deeply in the guiding principles of the Rural Social Enterprise Manifesto, to build trust first when working with rural people. So I know you mentioned that the local leads model isn't currently funded, but I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're thinking for Senvic in the future, of how you can continue to engage in a way with rural and regional social enterprises, but what it might look like if you were able to reactivate or create something new with rural social enterprises.
Great question. Something that is at the top of my mind, front of my mind all the time, and probably mentioned in every single board meeting. Florence is on our board. So currently, a lot of the regional conversations are very much alive, because 3 of our board members represent the region, right? So out of 7, 3. So that's almost 50%. So that is one of the great channels that we have, and we intend to keep those conversations alive. If even I made the mistake of forgetting, I think the board members are diligent to remind me that but the regions will think about this differently. So those are very robust conversations that we have at the board level. In terms of supporting the work, like really for us, partnerships and collaborations and being able to sort of work together with others is our path forward. We're doing that in an urban context as well. So the funding hasn't specifically run out just for regional. It's run out in general. So we're not supporting our metro local leads either. But there are some other options that we're able to use in the interim. In the regional, we do not have those options. So our goal really is to find partners in ACRE, in others who might be present here today, to work together to build this next chapter. What I'm very cognizant of is there's amazing work that has already been done. So it feels like amazing work is kind of just sitting there to be leveraged. And that's the opportunity that exists today for us to kind of work together and create something.
Thanks, Ashani. Yeah, I think that is again an example of how the networked and collaborative approach is particularly important working in rural context when funding and resources are scarce for all of us, unfortunately. I think that's a really nice sort of segue, since we've mentioned Florence. So thank you, Ashani. Ashani will be joining us again towards the end for some questions. We're going to move on to Florence, who Ashani was mentioning is both on the Senvic board, which is also an established social entrepreneur yourself, based in Mildura, although I know you're overseas at the moment. So thank you for calling in from the States, Florence. So you've played a critical role in the local leads model, along with a whole bunch of other initiatives that are probably too long to list here. I'd really love for you to share what the local leads model and involvement with Senvic has meant to you as a rural social entrepreneur on the ground, so in your local ecosystem and for your community.
Thanks, Meg. And yes, today I'm coming from the home of the Ojibwa, Odana, and the Potawatomi people, Native American Indians here in Greater Chicago. So I pay my respects to those traditional owners and custodians of land here as well. So for me, the local lead component was just so fabulous for us. We are in Mildura, 600 kilometres away from Melbourne, so we can't get any further away in Victoria. And we are on the tri-state, so we're on the border of New South Wales, Victoria, and we're an hour away from South Australia. So it's quite a unique space. The dilemma that we have, as many regions do have, is we don't have critical numbers. We don't have critical mass. So where we are 93,000 people living in 55,000 square kilometres. So when we look at the size of some of those townships, it could be your bus queue in the morning. If you're commuting in Melbourne, they're not really large towns, but of course are just as important and pivotal to the well-being of communities throughout the state. The local lead opportunity for us was to be connected, so to reduce the level of isolation that can be felt when you're an entrepreneur in a small community. Sometimes you are the entrepreneur on many, many community committees, etc., because it's like most places. If you're a busy person, of course, why wouldn't you take on something else as well? So there was also a level of fatigue for a number of people who had been trying to get things off the ground over the time. So the great ability in that very early phase of the local leads was about connection, recognition, like really recognizing that even our small community had something vital to offer, that the work that we were doing was important, and that the people we were looking to provide opportunities for were also important. And I think that was a really fantastic opportunity for us as an organisation, but also for our community, in saying, just because you're so far away doesn't mean you can't contribute, you can't participate, and you can't be part of this movement that has greater ability to make positive impact and change for as many people as possible. And whilst we don't have the critical mass, the impact of that change for people is absolutely life-changing. And we've seen that time and time again. And so being part of that local lead component allowed us to branch out, to be able to acknowledge that other people were also trying to provide social enterprises, or being socially enterprising, even if they weren't quite a social enterprise. But they were able to come together with that common goal of looking at purpose and passion, but also looking for local place-based solutions. And we know that when there are place-based solutions, we actually get some traction within the community. We start to not only turn around the impact for the people who are participating in the social enterprises, but also inviting others to expand that network, to join, to come and be part of the solution, and particularly in bringing along our local businesses and looking at how the philanthropy within a community is often untapped, it's often unknown, and unless there's an invitation, sometimes people don't know that they would be welcome to be part of that social enterprise drive and ability to make change. And I think that's certainly for me, the key point for the local leads was to be able to create an intraconnection for our community, that could then connect with Senvic as a whole. And whilst funding was really fabulous, that was one of those key things for us, is that it gave us some validation, but it was not a large amount of money. But again, in rural context, it doesn't often take an enormous amount of money to create a difference. And the big thing was to get people talking, to have people recognizing that what they were doing was valued and valuable, and that the more we got together, the greater the voice, the greater we were able to amplify the mission and this vision for a more equitable community, that we looked at disadvantage through a lens of capability and not a deficit model, and that we were able to then tap into some of the larger groups that were doing something similar. So things like we have a nursery called Growability, fantastic nursery that came about because we had a few people who had worked really, really hard to get their certificate 2 in horticulture. Horticulture and agribusiness, one of the largest businesses that we have in the Mallee region. You know, $6 billion industry, the food bowl for Victoria, and I stand by that. Thank you, Gippsland. But it is that component of being able to say there weren't any jobs for people when they'd finished their certificate 2. So we could have done all of that training, but not then actualise the intent, which was employment for people. We were very fortunate in terms of our philanthropic partners in Ian Potter Foundation and Colliers, who provided us with the funds to buy a nursery, which has now been going for 4 years and is premium. It has beautiful locally grown, locally hardened plants. So in terms of sustainability of native vegetation, extremely high in quality, but more importantly, we have 22 people employed. And that's ongoing employment. That makes a huge difference. And linking up with other smaller nurseries, we can then tender for larger government tender opportunities. As a small community, we couldn't. We might be able to do 100,000 plants. We can't do the million. But if there are 10 social enterprises who can all do 100,000, then we are a valued quality supplier for those goods and services. And that's ultimately, from a local lead perspective, where I'd really like to get us to, is being part of that collaborative, collective voice that allows people to come together to value add and to amplify the skills, the qualities, and the great product that social enterprises can produce.
Thanks, Florence. That's a brilliant example of how those barriers we face in rural communities do impact our ability to scale and be sustainable as enterprises, and then to create the impact that we want to there. But through that networked and collaborative approach, you can actually carve out a niche and an area to exist within the broader market. Thank you so much, Florence. You mentioned funding in there, so I'm going to take that as an opportunity to do a bit of a segue to our next speaker.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Florence, for sharing your insights, and welcome, Belinda. Now, Belinda, you play multiple important leadership roles in the social enterprise sector. However, today you're here as CEO of the English Family Foundation. And the English Family Foundation has been a catalytic supporter for the social enterprise sector and a long investor in networks. So can you tell us what it is that your organisation has seen in networks and why you've chosen to invest in them?
Thanks, Meg. Appreciate that. And just adding my acknowledgement that I'm joining from Gadigal country today, because what we're talking today about networks is something that First Nation peoples have been doing for, as you mentioned, 65,000 years. So The English Family Foundation, we've been around since about 2012. And whilst a lot of philanthropy has different sectors that they might actually have focus or strategies around, ours is really around the growth and development of social enterprise. So for the last number of years, it's looked at really how we can enable the ecosystem to allow social enterprises to thrive. So that has been fundamentally involving collaboration and networks, because we see that as the ability to enable the voices of the sector to come to the fore. And I think the reason why that's been so important to us, if I think about it, it sort of boils down to maybe three key things. And firstly is really having that sort of like localization, decolonizing lens over our work, understanding that local communities have the answers. They just often need the resources and the enabling environment to make that happen. And so therefore, what is the role of philanthropy in that is something that I'm really passionate about. I'm a city girl, I'm not a regional girl. So my role is often to shut up and listen and learn, because I don't necessarily have the answers. So how is it that we in philanthropy can bring all of our resources and join the dots and sort of act in that really privileged position of sort of network weaver in a way, and enable from that mechanism. And that's a lot of what we do at EFF as well. I think it's also important to acknowledge that our interest in networks stems from a deep belief in how we understand power, and how we in philanthropy shift and share power, and how we show up matters, and how we meet people where they're at matters. And lastly, I think the issue for me, my personal sort of mantra, is that change comes at the speed of trust. And so therefore, how we as philanthropy can enable that trust to build is really important. And for us, that means having the ability for social enterprises to have a seat at the table. I think it's been referenced that it takes a cross-sectoral collaboration to solve the wicked problems that we're facing. And we just are very keen that social enterprise has that seat at the table in relation to that response. And so therefore, the ability to sort of really hear the multiple voices. And I think that's been one of the many joys of Social Enterprise Australia, is that it's been enabled voices to come together that potentially haven't been hearing in the past. And so how we actually can unlock that collaboration and enable the sector to collaborate for itself. And if I think about Social Enterprise Australia, it was the national strategy initially, and out of that, Social Enterprise Australia was born to hold that national strategy work. And so I think for me personally, it was a really strong privilege to be able to lead that work as an independent, because I'm not a social entrepreneur, so I didn't have the competing timeframes on competing interests in my time and energy. I was actually able to sort of focus and to be that conduit there. So it's about understanding that we don't have the answers, but collectively we do. And so how we actually unlock that collective power is really important.
Thanks, Belinda. It's interesting you've picked up, or you've mentioned there, that you're not a social entrepreneur, but you're involved in these processes. So you bring a different perspective and you're able to observe other things. Would you be able to share perhaps some insights that you've come across as a funder, being involved in these networks and working closely with social entrepreneurs?
Oh, that's a big question. God, how long do we have? Yeah, look, even from a funding point of view, I remember one of the sort of triggers for me very, very, very early on in my journey to try and understand the systemic issues and therefore the complexity around that was actually a learning from a Californian foundation. And they were a pretty traditional funder had a very impressive budget by Australian standards. And a new CEO came on board, and she sort of did this massive listening tour to really understand, are we doing what we say we do? And she decided, actually, we're not. And so from that, she really flipped the whole model for that foundation to underpin and fund and support collaboration, understanding that if we are really to move the dial on social issues, it takes everybody to have a seat at the table, but the social sector has to be supported to have that seat at the table. And that really influenced me very early on in actually how philanthropy can shift our perspectives and be influenced, and therefore drive greater collaboration through our own philanthropic practices.
Brilliant. Thanks, Belinda. I think that I'm going to take this as an opportunity to move to Fiona and hear from Fiona and say a big thank you to Ashani, Belinda, and Florence for really giving us an understanding of what exists currently from both a network, a local Leeds and rural social enterprise perspective, and also a funder. Because we're going to slightly shift focus for this one, and we're going to chat with Fiona. Fiona's a principal at Make Studios, who are a specialist co-design firm who are located in Melbourne. And they've been working closely with the social enterprise sector, including us at ACRE and CENVIC, in developing an approach for the co-design of a rural social enterprise network for Australia. So Fiona is actually going to tell us a little bit of what our plans are next and how we're going to start bringing that co-design process to life. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Fiona.
Thanks, Meg. I'm joining from Wurundjeri land, and I'd like to join the other presenters in paying my respects to Wurundjeri elders past and present. I'm also going to share my screen because some of the things I'm talking about are a little easier to get across when you've got some visuals. So here you go. So I guess first thing I wanted to do, and I can sort of see the people on the call now, I'm sharing my screen, maybe whether it's through emojis or putting a hand up, who here on the call is familiar with co-design, either in theory as a practice or through having been part of a co-design process yourself? Oh, we've got some hands up and some thumbs up. Thank you for using the emojis. Okay. I'm excited that some of you will have your own personal experiences to draw on with this, because with what we're talking about here, it can feel a little abstract. And so what I'm trying to do with these visuals is make it a little more tangible. So as it says on the slide, a co-design process is a collaborative approach that engages key stakeholders in the creation or development of an initiative, ensuring their voices and experiences directly shape the outcome. So the idea is that it's an emergent process. It's designed for community collaboration, participation, and ownership. And that's super important because you can have all the great ideas in the world, but unless the people who are actually bringing it to life feel like it's theirs and believe in it, things won't work. So this Venn diagram, I love a Venn for a lot of reasons. Lived experience is front and center, top of that diagram. People in rural social enterprises and rural communities. We'll also be looking at drawing on professional experience. So that's networks, intermediaries, government, funding bodies, people who have experience in social enterprise, even if they're not rural social enterprises. And then we also bring an external perspective into the co-design process. So Make will be bringing that external perspective to the process. However, the outcomes will be led by those with lived experience and professional experience of rural social enterprise. Ashani and Belinda both mentioned the importance of open-ended questions, listening, learning, putting your assumptions aside. And so, Make with our external perspective will be practicing all of those things through a co-design process. And so in the call for this process, we're talking about a rural social enterprise network for Australia, but what that actually looks like, how it works, or even what it's called, that's all going to be shaped by the design process participants. It's not something that we're coming in with a fixed end goal for. I know that still can sort of feel a little abstract. For those of you who haven't been part of a co-design process yourself, I wanted to explain a few of the projects that Make has participated in or led. So that included developing community co-design framework with inclusive services provider GenU, co-designing mental health services with regional community service providers and Beyond Blue, taking a participatory design and social innovation approach to improve the safety and wellbeing of in-home support workers with WorkSafe Victoria, and also co-designing tools and engagement campaigns that led to Victoria being the first state to achieve equal representation for women in the Australian Honours with the Victorian Government Department of Premier and Cabinet. So these are processes that lead to real outcomes. They also lead to real engagement and ownership. Make is also an ongoing and active partner in Moving Feast, which is a network of social enterprises and aligned businesses that are collaborating for a connected, fair and regenerative Victorian food system led by Social Enterprise Street. When we talk about like how we ensure that co-design outcomes are designed and owned by rural communities, that really comes down to designing a governance, support and engagement ecosystem to distribute ownership and power. So starting with roles, responsibilities, clarity about who's being brought in and you know, who's steering things, clarity is about where people's boundaries and limitations are as well. So we established that right at the start. I'll go more into, there's the conveners and governance group there on the next slide. There's also, I'll go into the co-design facilitators as well in a bit more detail, because you'll see some new roles or groups that we're talking about in there. I also just want to make it really clear to anyone who's on the call and thinking about this, that there are so many ways to be involved in the co-design process, depending on your experience and your capacity to participate. So we really want to ensure that anyone who wants to be part of this process can participate in a way that suits them. Even if it's that you've got too much on your plate right now, but you want to stay in the loop until you have a chance to be more involved. If there's something where you want to take a real leadership role, there's opportunities there. If there's opportunities to sort of, you know, have your say at any stage of the process, it's really important that this feels like it meets people where they're at. And that's not just in terms of what they want out of the outcomes, but also where they're at in terms of what they can contribute. When we look at stakeholders and subject matter experts as well in this you know, different sort of model that we're pulling together, state-based networks, social enterprise networks will be engaged as stakeholders and subject matter experts. So we can ensure that the outcomes create a stronger, more connected social enterprise sector that builds upon and works with the progress and initiatives that state-based networks are making. So we absolutely are saying, you know, throughout this, a rural social enterprise network is not a different thing to the state-based networks. It's something that we're saying we're wanting to look at how we can build those connections between rural communities where, to Florence's point, you may have people in common, things in common with people an hour away across the border, because you've got such a shared context, and making sure we're strengthening some of those connections. Just to expand, I said I'd talk about some of the convener and governance roles. So ACRE and CENVIC are leading the call for the co-design process. You know, we've heard from Meg and Ishani and Florence, you know, within that context. They're looking at securing and managing funding and initiating the establishing phase of the process. And then we're also going to be, for conveners, establishing a co-design working group to help govern the process. So part of the establishing phase of the process, including the call for participation and stakeholder mapping, will be forming this co-design working group. And it'll be made up of people running or working in social enterprises and rural communities. The other roles I wanted to talk a little bit about, for the co-design facilitation, Make Studios will design the co-design process and the engagement activities. We'll also be training regional engagement coordinators and synthesizing and collating the outputs of co-design activities. This can be one of those things that sort of just needs to keep ticking along, and understanding again how much regional and rural social enterprises are doing with how little time. It's an important thing to know that there's someone ticking away with it as the process continues. And these regional engagement coordinators are a term we've sort of been using because we want to look at local leaders and community members to be trained in co-design and supported to run co-design activities in their communities, using engagement approaches that are really suited to their local context. So there's not going to be one size fits all for the way that people can be putting a call out. We know that there's you know, some communities where distance is going to be huge and we need to be tapping into existing events, for example, because that's when people will be coming together. We know that there's some communities where there's existing ways of you know, communicating or getting people together to collaborate that we could be looking at and tapping into. But most importantly, we know that the people who have those answers are in the communities themselves. So we're looking at training them and providing them with the tools and resources to be working in a way that suits their community. Members of the co-design working group and regional engagement coordinators, there may be some crossover there as well. Just wanted to make that clear if you're thinking you want to do both. Kind of just a high-level visual of the steps in the co-design process. I think one thing to understand in here is that ACRE and MAKE's involvement gradually decreases throughout the process as the participants take ownership of the outcomes and next steps. Looking at regional engagement coordinators' role in those middle engaging and prototyping phases, they'll be essential to the reach and the locally appropriate engagement activities of the process. Florence even talked about people who are being socially enterprising rather than seeing themselves as social enterprises. And I think that's part of what we're hoping to capture with this reach as well. So sort of, local engagement leads will be building those connections and bringing people into the process who, may not have thought to, self-nominate. It's certainly, that's a high level idea. It looks very linear. We know from experience that there's certainly going to be some twists and turns on the way, but that's also part of the joy of it. And to help guide us, ACRE, CENVIC and MAKE have identified some strategies to successfully engage regional and rural social enterprises. I've talked a lot about pragmatic and flexible approach facilitated by community members. That just comes back to the idea that we can't possibly say from Melbourne, there's one size that's going to fit all. There's absolutely no way. So what we're going to be doing is working in a way that gives a lot of flexibility. We're looking at committing to an emergent process, not a specific outcome. So again, this sort of ambiguity can be uncomfortable for some people. And I think it's important to sort of say we're committing to a process that we know works. The fact that we don't say this is exactly how it's going to be at the end is part of the strength of that process. It's not a weakness of it. So, for co-design to truly work, we do need to really ask people what they need. We really need to listen when they tell us, and we need to be open to being surprised when it doesn't match what we might have thought when we were going in. I think Belinda gave a great example of that, actually. And, you can pivot as you go. The value of an external perspective is that I'm not working in a rural social enterprise, so I actually don't have a bias towards a particular solution. I think that everything I hear will be on some level a surprise. Communication and transparency, this is going to be absolutely key. I think, Meg, you mentioned, about the idea of building trust first and understanding context. And that's going to be, central to this. Prototyping to learn. So we'll be looking at using a theory of change model as part of our prototyping. That's our first idea. Once we start with that, we may pivot, but that's the value of prototyping, putting things in front of people so they can sort of see how their input is progressing us towards an end goal, not just being part of chat. And international knowledge sharing. So in the chat, you had some questions about examples or academic studies. We'll be building on the impact model framework. We're going to also be, leveraging the momentum and the relationships developed in support of the global rural social enterprise network to be seeking knowledge sharing and input from other social enterprise networks and processes. Is there anything you'd like to sort of dig into a little more?
I think you've given us a beautiful overview, Fiona, of the process that we have planned. And for the rest of us on the call, this is something that we're actively seeking funding for so that we can bring to life with MAKE and CENVIC. But in particular, I'd like to commend MAKE's ability to work with rural communities in particular, being that it can be so complex and different and down to things that you may not necessarily expect when you're urban based, such as when might there be childcare available? Is there only public transport? Is there only one hall? And that's the Women's Association's night, and therefore you will have to meet in the pub. All of those little nuances. So thanks, Fiona. I'm going to go to questions, and I'm going to start with a question that Fiona's already alluded to and started to answer. And that's a question from Irene around whether if there's any research underpinning the effectiveness of a network model, and caveat that she is an academic and we always appreciate an academic in the mix. Keen to know the components and connections that have been researched to figure out how we might adopt a similar approach in a new area. Before I throw it to one of our panelists, I do want to say that we often hear how difficult it is for researchers to engage effectively and efficiently with rural communities and rural social enterprises in particular. So that's the potential purpose of the network, and something that we would like to be, if we think that would be important, something to be heard in the co-design process when it's taking place. But I'm actually going to throw this question to Belinda. In terms of the evidence for backing established networks and support in the social enterprise sector as a funder.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. And great question, because I think that when I look at the Social Enterprise Australia journey, which started, as I said, as SENS, the Social Enterprise National Strategy, it was based off the back of the incredible work done by the Griffith University, which looked at interviews within Australia's social enterprise, outside the sector, and also globally. And actually, it was really interesting because I think from a philanthropic point of view, it was easier to convince philanthropy because we had this like research that said, hey, yeah, national strategy is really, really important, but actually the sector's got to get its shit together first. And that looks like X, Y, and Z, bang, bang, bang. And so we had sort of we knew the North Star, as Fiona said, it's iterative, is absolutely iterative and exploratory. So we knew the North Star where we wanted to get to, but we had this sort of modular kind of thinking around, well, it could look like this, it could look like that. So it gave philanthropy a bit of an understanding to sort of say, oh, okay, I can kind of get my head around this now. So that research was actually really critical. And I would really commend that research to you guys as well, because there's been a lot of research done in the social enterprise sector, and it's really critical intel that can advise and inform.
Thanks, Belinda. So our first point could be the Social Enterprise National Strategy, and then we can go from there. There's obviously a lot of research out there. Well, thanks, Belinda. The next question I have is for Florence, and it's around bringing social enterprises together on the ground. You shared a story about working together with different nurseries, and the question's around, well, what was the call to action to bring all the different people and organisations around? And was there something compelling in the invitation to join this network that cut through the fatigue and noise of all your other commitments and responsibilities?
Thanks for that, Meg. Absolutely. We can't do it on our own. You know, we're going to be left behind. We need to come together. We've all got common purpose. We've all got, in this instance for plants, we've all got plants that are going to be able to be part of a large tender, which could see all of our nurseries be profitable. So how do we do business for good that's also good for our business? And that's one of those key things in saying, I don't know about you, but we're not getting any government contracts because we're too small. We can't hit the mark. We're just falling short. Rather than just buying from you at wholesale price and adding them to our plants, why not do it collectively and see if that in fact makes a better pitch? So I guess it's around sharing the opportunity and not getting caught up in competitive tendering, which is always quite difficult for smaller organisations to do. But how do we do it so that everybody gains a level of benefit that is, you know, mutually acceptable for everybody?
So finding that common ground and inviting people in for the benefit of each other.
Yeah, I think one of the strategies that we use is we're on the continual invite.
Yeah.
Who else can we invite? Is there anybody we've missed? We've invited this group before, but they didn't take up the opportunity. It might just be timing. Maybe we can invite them again. So you keep that open relationship going so that you never know when the opportunity is going to be right. In similar ways with yarning circles and talking with our First Nations people in terms of how can we do this together, because it's difficult for everybody. So do we half the difficulty and do we double the success?
Brilliant. Thanks, Florence. The next question I have here is for Ashani from Christopher Booth. Is there a strategy of engaging with the DEWR local jobs program job coordinators in the region?
Yes, thanks for that question. Yeah, the short answer is yes. But in the spirit of collaboration and activating multiple networks, I think what we realize with government, may that be federal, state, or local, that it's less about the position, more about the person. And so if anyone who's on this call today has kind of warm relationships with particular job coordinators in their regions and or local councils, please come forward and share that with us, because we do not claim to know everybody, and we are always willing to take a warm introduction. And I'm sure Fiona will, once she sort of gets onto this co-design process, some of them potentially could be involved in that co-design process. So the answer is yes, but door is always open, to Florence's point, for new introductions of people that you may know who might be working in the area and are wanting to talk to us.
Thanks, Ashani. And it seems to be a very common theme that to keep your door open, transparency, and inviting people through the whole conversation. So it's definitely coming along as strong as building trust. The next,
I just wanted to add something else, Meg, to that, to Florence's point, if that's okay, because it just struck me as when we convene metro events, we always look at numbers. How many people showed up? How many people showed up? When we look at regional and rural, one of the key things that I've gotten to train myself on is to say, just care less about the numbers, because obviously the assumption there is that there are lots of people. Often there aren't. It's who's in the room and who else is coming to join us. Even that sort of shift has allowed us to sometimes have very small rooms, like 3 people in a conversation, which is still extremely worthwhile.
thanks, Ashani. And that is a brilliant point, because the lack of critical mass and population in rural and remote areas is a significant barrier for us engaging in with our state-based networks, with our council, with government, and all of those ones. It's not just the distance, but yeah, when you drive 3 hours, as our local councillors do, to come to Mallacoota, and you have 2 people turn up, it can feel disheartening. But when you do the percentage of the whole town, it actually turns out to be quite a good turnout. So reframing those metrics is always a really great thing to do when you're working in rural communities. And again, another principle out of the Rural Social Enterprise Manifesto is to co-design the metrics of success with rural people so that it exists within their context. I have a question for Fiona about the co-design. The co-design seems intrinsic to ATSI ways of working. I'm wondering if there are known ways of framing this work that honour and are particularly respectful of using the ATSI specific environments, such as ATSI communities.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Meg. And thanks, Roxanne, for asking this question. I saw it in the chat, and gives me an opportunity to talk about one of our office mates. Meg is located in Gate 8 building on a level that's all social enterprises, and we are there because of our partnership with Street. And one of the other office mates we have is Murup, who do incredible work in remote Indigenous communities. And their frameworks and their ways of co-designing are absolutely a fantastic opportunity to learn and learn from them. The way they describe it is they're an Aboriginal community controlled organisation. They are a social enterprise. They partner with remote communities to design and deliver place-based programs. So their focus is supporting children, young people and their families. And that includes, they do incredible work in the Tiwi Islands. They do, work in communities that, are really very rural, very remote, and their co-design approach is absolutely centered on the idea that this is designed, owned, delivered, led by community, because the point is not to come in, parachute in and fix things. That's like such outdated thinking. It's to say, hey, we want to help remove some of those barriers, help give you the support so you can solve things in the way that you know works for your community and feel proud in having done that. I think that's, I think rather than trying to list off sort of principles or frameworks, I just point to Murup and say, everything they do is what we can learn from when working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities.
Beautiful.
I hope that answers it. Yeah.
Thanks, Fiona.
No worries.
Now, I've only got a few minutes remaining of our webinar, so I'm going to call a close to the questions and first start with a huge thank you to all of our panelists, to Ashani, Florence, Belinda and Fiona, for sharing your perspectives from across the ecosystem and for sharing the love, which is a little bit corny, but the love of networks with us as well. There is a link in the chat that is to join the call for a co-design for a rural social enterprise network for Australia. If you click on that link and sign up, you are not committing to signing your life away. There is also another option to just stay informed and stay connected. So please, if you're interested, continue on with us on the journey towards a co-design process. I think that other than thanking our friends at Social Enterprise Australia for this wonderful opportunity, I'm going to pass back to Kate to close out this session and thank our panelists once more.
Thanks so much, Meg, and thanks to all of you for your time and wonderful insights. My tail's wagging here. It's so exciting to hear you talk about how those strengthening networks really builds the movement. And, you know, some of those sentences that I'm going to hold about being socially enterprising. Everybody on this call is socially enterprising regardless of your role. And it's really exciting how you're using the local leads and the future regional engagement coordinators to really bring that to life. So thank you for that. And I just want to acknowledge that with the Social Enterprise Development Initiative and the funding from DSS that's made some of these chats possible, we're really excited to keep those conversations going and support these wonderful insights. And I do want to just do a quick shout out to my colleagues at SEA who are in the back end pulling all of this together today, and recognise that we've had such a wonderful audience participation, and we will be sharing the information afterwards. And we wish you all a wonderful day ahead. We look forward to connecting more. Thank you.